Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the Women of MENA in Tech digital event. So, right now we are starting our panel discussion. The sessions have ended. We will have another networking event at the end so we can finish the conversation. Again, thank you so much for joining the event today. My name is Parnas Tabrizian, and I'm a part of Women of MENA in Tech Montreal. To give you a bit of intro to Women of MENA in Tech, our mission is to empower Middle Eastern and North African women, and in general women, around the world to the fields of technology, STEM, innovation, and entrepreneurship. We have more than 19 chapters all around the world, and the events are typically sponsored by tech giants, companies such as Amazon, Netflix, Hopin, and etc. And we have had sponsors different verticals as well. At Women of MENA in Tech Montreal, we're looking for sponsors that share our mission to sponsor our events. And if your company is interested, please email us at the email that we will share with you after the introduction. Also, we have our fourth annual conference coming up on November 4th and November 5th, currently sponsored by Amazon, Hopin, and Planet One. You can use the link that I will also share at the end to the event to register to join. And if you are interested in sponsoring, we still have some spots left. And please email us at conference@womenofmena'intechnology.com. So the agenda for today will be a 15-minute panel discussion followed by a 10-minute question and answer session. Feel free to type your questions here in the chat section, and they will be answered during the Q&A. We will also have a 30-minute reserved for networking at the end. You will get a chance to have your one-on-one with speaker. So similar to what you saw at the beginning of the networking, you can feel free to drop into the conversation that's going on or share with the video and audio and have your questions answered by one of our panelists. So finally, I would like to hand it to our esteemed moderator, Layial El-Hadi, to do the panelist introduction. I was lucky enough to work personally with Layial, and I'm very honored to introduce her today. Layial is the Executive Director of Fintech Cadence and a professor at Concordia University. Before Fintech Cadence, she was the CEO at Apisten, and she sits on the advisory board of Queen's University's Master Financial Innovation and Technology. In 2019, Layial was identified as Digital Finance Institute's top 50 women in fintech, and in 2018, Layial was awarded Mentor of the Year by Montreal New Tech for being the individual who had the biggest and most positive impact on the Montreal startups. So with that, I would hand it to Layial to do the introduction to our very interesting panel today.
Hi, Parnaz. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm always thrilled to be in these kind of conversations, and even more so to be doing it in the context of women in MENA. And Parnaz, that was a very generous and kind introduction from you. It was always a pleasure working with you, and you were also working with Fintech Cadence, and I've been following your career and loving what you've been doing. But today, I'm also very excited to be able to welcome three panelists that I have here with me. And I think we should all be very lucky to be able to hear from three individuals who have a lot of experience in this area, to be able to ask questions, to engage with them, and to hear their thoughts about this key component of building your own business, and that is financing. And so without further ado, I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves, but I would like to first introduce them, and I'm going to introduce them by way that I see them. So Cedric is joining us today. He's the Director of Business Development at Montreal International. Hi, Cedric.
Hi, Layial. Thank you.
We also have Laviva, who's an investment associate at Luge Capital. Hi, Laviva.
Hi, Layial.
Hi. And last but not least, we have Azadeh, who is the CEO and co-founder of Vital Tracer. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
So I hope our audience is really excited to hear from everybody here today. We're going to be having some really great conversations, and like I said, focusing it on the financing experience. As Parnaz also mentioned, please engage with us. All of our panelists have done this quite a few times, and so are very comfortable taking your questions as we go along. And I do know this is virtual, but please feel as interactive as you'd like to be. Ask us questions, post comments. We have visibility on them, so we'll be able to engage with you guys as you go through it. Now, without further ado, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to do a quick introduction and their experiences, and then we're going to get straight into the questions. And I'm going to do it in reverse this time. And Azadeh, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about who Vital Tracer is, how you got into all of this world.
Sure. Thank you very much. How much minute do I have to talk about it?
We're going to do it quick, 1 minute.
Sure. I'm Azadeh, Dastmalchi, CEO of the Whiteout Tracer. Whiteout Tracer is a startup located in Montreal. We are concentrating on a wearable technology using optical sensor and AI. The current technology that we have is the watch on the wrist and the patch for the chest on the chest. It's measuring all vital signs, and our specialty is measuring blood pressure without cough and continuous. We started in 2019 from Montreal, built our alpha and beta prototype. We are now in the phase of running a clinical trials and at the same time manufacturing. And we were able to raise a $1 million non-dilutive grant, half from Loved Money, family and friends, and the other from government.
That's amazing. So first of all, I just want to say I don't want to say congratulations. That seems a little bit demeaning, but really well done on the work that you're doing. I think it's always amazing when we're seeing tech and health come together, especially in the context of what we've been experiencing. And I can't wait to hear more about how you got involved with the Love Money, loans, and grants as well. So we're going to get into that in a little bit. Laviva, I'm going to jump over to you.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for having me here. So I'm Laviva. I'm an investment associate at Luge Capital. It's a fintech-focused venture capital firm, $85 million under management. We invest in early-stage fintech startups across Canada and US. So I've been with the firm pretty much from when we launched back in 2018, working on the investment side, supporting our portfolio companies, helping build our investment thesis, and basically, conducting the investment process, due diligence, and deal structuring, and so on. Before that, I spent a couple of years at First Capital Partners. It's a firm that actually co-created their own fintech startups. So I spent a bunch of time operating alongside some of the founders that were building those early days, fintech startups, and also doing a bit of investments in other startups that they were not building in-house as well.
That's wonderful. And Laviva, I'm a little biased towards you because, of course, you work with a cause or a sector that's very dear to my heart, fintech. So love to hear the experience. And I can't wait to as well get into the details of what it's been like and your views, because you've been in the ecosystem, I think, longer than me, but we're still young. But in the same enough there to be able to kind of see really what are the key things when it comes to financing at a later stage. So I'm really excited to see that. And FCP and Luge Capital have an amazing track record with startups that you guys have worked with, Flinks, Milo/Mogo now. So
Yes.
It's going to be great to see some of those experiences that you bring. Thank you, Laviva. And Cedric, last but not least.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Layial. So Cedric from Montreal International. We're the Economic Development Agency for Greater Montreal. Our mandates are specifically on bringing the international to Montreal. So whether it's large companies, entrepreneurs, that's my mandate, international students, and also international talents. So like I said, my mandate is really focused on helping the international entrepreneurs and startups come and choose our beautiful city, Montreal, to come and set up here. And help them connect with the ecosystem, see what they need in terms of finding the right incubator, accelerator. Before that, I used to work at EY in everything related to grants and financing for startups in terms of tech. I used to do large companies too, but I had way more fun working with the entrepreneurs and the startups. So thank you for having me in this panel, Layial.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Cedric. And I won't disagree with you. I also enjoy working with the startups, but we won't say anything about all the industry because they obviously play a very key and vital role there. And Cedric, yeah, you bring with you such a wealth of experience, not only from your EY days, but also understanding what the Montreal specific landscape looks like and the comparison. So for the audience, I'm sure you guys can see why we're very excited to have these three really experienced individuals here with us today. And without further ado, we're going to get straight into the questions and straight into the idea of financing. Now, for those in the audience, I think all of our panelists would love to know if you do have a company, if you do have a startup, and you're listening in today, please let us know what stage of financing you might have done before, what stage of financing you're interested in, and what some of the challenges have been. I'd love to see it and also direct the panelists about some of those comments that you guys who are here listening today have experienced. In general, today, when we start talking about financing, we're going to be referring to a few key components of it, starting with Love Money, as they already mentioned that, loans, government grants, We're also going to be talking about VCs. What do the funds and angel investors look like? And funnily enough, we're also going to be talking about what does it look like to bootstrap and create financing just from your own product revenue too. So quite an array of financing processes that you guys have available to you here in Canada and in Montreal. So we'll be getting into that, and we'll be talking to our panelists about their experiences in each of those areas. But let's just start off in general. I think it's also important for those of you guys who are looking to start financing your startup or want to build a startup and want to know, well, money is going to be the biggest issue. How do I get into it? Let's start understanding what does the landscape look like in Canada in general. And so I'm going to ask our panelists at large before we get specifically, and I'm going to ask you guys comparatively, how do you find the financing landscape in Canada today? Maybe especially within the context of COVID, if that has created a difference. And does it differ across the different provinces? And so I'll open the floor to you guys, and you guys can jump in if whoever wants to take this question.
I can speak for the venture ecosystem, and obviously my lens is a bit biased again because it's very much focused on fintech. But I'd say that having been in the ecosystem for about 5 or a little bit more years now, I definitely think there's a lot more funding activity from a venture perspective. There are many more new venture funds that are raising capital. And we're also seeing more interest in the Canadian startup ecosystem from international VCs as well. So more and more US VCs are looking to invest in Canada as well. And then from a COVID perspective, if anything, the funding landscape has gotten more competitive. Every time I speak with any of my other VC connections in other firms, whether it's in Canada or US, they're constantly saying, yeah, deals are happening a lot faster. There's a lot more competition to get into, the good deals. So I think it's all for the better. I think there's a lot more funding activity in Canada. And then very quickly, geographically, I'd say that, typically, at least for fintech and maybe some other categories as well, we see Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver being kind of like the big hubs, with Toronto having more of a lion's share of the startups. However, we're seeing a lot more increased activity in other markets as well. We just did an investment out west, not in Vancouver. I can't announce what it is yet, but it's an interesting province. So yeah, there's startup activities in other provinces as well.
Perfect. That's wonderful. I'm excited to hear what the new investment is, Laviva. And for those of you guys who are interested as well, make sure you're following Luge Capital on LinkedIn so you're able to see the announcement when it comes out. Azadeh, I see you want to jump in.
Yeah, so I can talk about in terms of the startup, very small company, 2 to 3 co-founders. So compared with the US, the government, especially government of Quebec, super supportive in terms of, and very generous in terms of providing grants and non-dilutive funds. And the ecosystem here in Montreal, especially in terms of AI, it's one of the biggest and the best because we have a Mila and we have a Benjia here. And I believe that the province government tried to make a Silicon Valley in Canada, but the good part that the expense is less here. And for the R&D and building the startup goes to the commercialization phase, there are lots of funds compared with the US.
Yeah, I think you said that brilliantly, Azadeh. So from one perspective, we're really looking at a very supportive government funding pool, which is really great. And we're going to get into that in more details with your personal experience. But also what's really key to keep in mind is there is a lot of advantages to building a startup in Canada from the cost wise as well, right? And we're seeing companies, not only startups, but we're seeing American companies take advantage of being able to hire at a lower cost here in Canada, being able to take advantage of the R&D costs that are cheaper here in Canada as well. And so that's a wonderful thing to highlight. And it actually leads us really nicely into Cedric, because you have wonderful visibility on that. So did you want to jump in here with some of your perspectives?
Yeah, sure. So, well, in terms of the landscape, Azadeh here talked about it briefly. Quebec, in terms of government, it's really, there's a lot of money going into innovation, into R&D. If we backtrack a few years ago, there was no necessarily real initiative in order to support the startups per se. There were some for SMEs, etc. But now the Ministry of Economy created a few years ago Startup Quebec, which is really managing a separate envelope for the startups, for the ecosystem. That's on top of the other, the Ministry of Science or Education, etc., that they also finance in terms of research or collaboration between entrepreneurs, startups, large companies, academia. We see it a bit in the other provinces, but Quebec really sets itself apart there. And then there's obviously the big programs from the federal government that are applicable across Canada. So there's still a lot of programs that entrepreneurs can tap into that are federal programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say as well, from Fintech Cadence's perspective, we're seeing a lot of startups take advantage of those grants. So I'm loving seeing what's happening here with some of those early non-dilutive funding as well. Thank you very much, Cedric, from that perspective. So I do want to kind of bring in a little bit of my experience here and ask you guys, oftentimes when we work with startups at Fintech Cadence, we ask the startups, what are some of the top 3 things you need support on? And bar none, the majority of them always include financing on some capacity as things that they need support on. But I'll be honest, in some cases, startups are just not ready there. They're still in the idea stage. They're still not really sure if it's the right time to go in the financing stage. And I also see we have with us today an audience member named Livia. So hello, Livia. And she says she's excited because she's a co-founder. She's bootstrapped their B2B SaaS venture for 16 months. And now they're at the point where they need capital in order to scale their product and meet demand and grow sales. And so they're thinking it's the right time to raise. And no doubt there, Olivia, that might be the right thing. But I want to also just kind of in the context of startups, trying to understand when they need to raise and when they don't. How should the startups initially determine if they need financing from the very get-go? And let me actually, Azadeh, I'm going to start with you. For you guys, how did you know when it was time to start saying, okay, we need financing? Maybe not specifically what kind of financing, but to say, okay, now we need financing.
So our technology is building hardware first, and building a hardware, we have to buy a material. And then we need to test on a different people's means recruitment that we need to do that. And we need to pay for staff also as well. So that's the part. Because before 2019, actually, we had the Viral Tracer as a company, but not zero staff, zero things. The only things that we built are prototype before establishing the company. It's maybe MVP or first prototype, alpha prototype. But then in 2019, we find that we need the money. So we establish officially the company in Quebec, and we start applying for different grants, which is a free money, I can call it, to cover those costs.
Perfect. And I'm actually just going to pause here, do a little bit of terminology. We've mentioned the phrase non-dilutive funding a couple of times. Azadeh, do you want to just quickly explain what non-dilutive funding means?
Free money from government. And then you don't give any equity or share to anyone. So it's like good money, I call it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to expand on that a little bit more. But for our audience members, exactly like Azadeh said, non-dilutive funding means funding where you don't have to give any share or any control of your company away. And it's really crucial that you understand that concept and when is the right time to give shares, because it can impact your whole startup's financing journey or lifetime. We're going to say lifetime is the wording there. So make sure you guys also keep in mind, what does that look like for you guys? Laviva, Cedric, any advice or any perspective from you guys there?
I mean, typically we see startups reaching out to us. Pretty much what Azadeh just described was the need for her business is, either you've validated the idea a little bit and you've done some development work, you're ready to launch in market, whether that's on the direct consumer side or on the B2B side. And I think even the audience member that you just mentioned, she mentioned that she's seeing interest in the sales, so now she needs to put people behind that. I mean, this is exactly when we typically see startups looking to raise venture money. The only thing I'll add here is that some startups, before raising venture money or going to a VC, a lot of them have already raised capital from friends and family or angel investors as well. So, they've raised a bit of equity capital before going to a traditional VC.
Perfect. And I know we're going to get a little bit more into the VC world, Laviva, but I just want to do a quick follow-up there for you before I jump to Cedric. And that's around how much, from your perspective, from a VC do you want to see other kind of funding before they've come to you? How much does that impact, or is it not something that you guys consider at all?
I would say I've never looked at a company and said, oh, they've raised no angel money before, so I'm not going to look at it. It's not like that. I would say it's more about what kind of progress am I able to see? You know, there's some startups that we funded where they may have not raised any capital before, but somehow they were able to show some validation or some development, and we had really high conviction on that founder, or maybe we had really high conviction on the opportunity itself, and we decided to come in at the pre-seed round. There have been other situations where we came in at the Series A. So they already did pre-seed, they did seed, and then we came in at the Series A. So it really, I think, you know, it depends on a case by case basis.
Perfect. So for the audience, if you are wondering, should I not raise other kind of models before I see a VC, or if I'm going to see a VC, if I've raised before, does it matter? You have the answer there. I know it's case by case, not only by startup Laviva, but of course by different funds as well. So glad to hear that kind of perspective from you. Perfect. Cedric, you've coached a lot of startups there. What do you normally tell them when they're trying to consider if they need financing, and are they ready?
Yeah, well, definitely what I maybe because of my background also, I try to see what are some of the non-dilutive options first, you know, like Azadeh was mentioning, government grants, that also always helps. You know, one of the ones we see the most, there's the R&D tax credit, obviously, there's the IRAP from the National Research Council, METAX also, that helps subsidize part of hiring an intern, a master's or PhD students. So there's all these programs that are available for startups that want to innovate, get their product on the market, finalize their product, where VCs usually are tend to be more focused on, okay, well, what are you going to do with our money? You want to sell. We want you to sell with that money, right? We want you to hire business developers. We want you to expand the markets, etc. However, you know, it's not all sunshine and rainbow, right? You don't just call the government and tell them, well, I want money, and they just cut you a check, right? So you have to watch out on a few things regarding these programs. Is first, I would say, really don't try to change your startup or your product just because there's that specific program that you can apply to and it gives you some money, you know, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 check. Because these programs usually take a lot of time, and I've seen some startups go into the grant chaser a bit approach, where they go and they try to apply to all these grants, and then they forget that, hey, I'm running a startup. I'm not running a company on getting grants, right? So it's great money, like as they said, yes, it's free money, but you must not forget that, you know, it takes time to fill applications. Sometimes it's a contest. Sometimes, you know, they don't always say yes. It takes time. You know, the process, you're dealing with the government. You're not dealing with a VC. It might take months and months before you get that money. And also, my last advice, I would say, is to do your research before applying to a grant or to a provincial or federal program. Don't wait till you need that money or that you think you're ready to apply before looking into it, because there's so many differences in terms of programs, in terms of the timeline. Like if I want to take an example, the R&D tax credit that is available for companies who do research and development, so develop new products. There's innovation there, technological challenges they're trying to overcome. Well, that's basically, the envelope is unlimited, if you want to say it like that, and usually the money comes in 6 months after filing your taxes, so you have to file your taxes to get that check. Or another program like IRAP, well, the program opens once a year at the federal government calendar year, so April 1st. And I think it's around 300 million, and it's an envelope that is usually finished by the end of the summer, beginning fall. So you can't just try to submit an application in the fall. What we usually suggest is, well, in the fall, try to see who's your local NRC agents in the area. Try to get an appointment, pitch your startup, pitch the project that you wanna submit, get their feedback, very essential. See what and at least you'll be able to see if, are you gonna waste your time filling an application, or are they gonna tell you, well, listen, maybe this year it's going to be a bit tough because all our money is assigned, but apply for next year. We'll definitely take a look at it. So all these things still take time. Yes, it is free money, but you have a lot of there's some investment on your side, maybe not money or share wise, but definitely investment in time.
Yeah, that was a wealth of knowledge there, Cedric. Thank you so much for that. I was actually like, yes, I agree with that. I agree with that. And it's funny you talk about not, startups sometimes falling into the trap of chasing grants, because there's a whole industry around that as well, right? People helping you write research, helping you write financing grants. There's a huge shred consulting industry as well. So you're absolutely correct. You can't fall into that trap. But what's great and what's really key is that you highlighted is it's really important to understand what's available to you and when it's available to you. And I just put in the chat, I hope you guys can see it, what Cedric mentioned. NRC, the concierge services, I think that was what it's called in my time. I don't know if they changed the terminology, but an NRC agent who will help guide you through these grants. One of the things I feel the government has done really well lately is they've updated a lot of their online information. And so if you guys are trying to figure out, and maybe you don't want to go through an NRC concierge service, it is free, by the way, but maybe you don't want to go through that process. You can go online. The government has created a website where you can actually test and see, okay, I'm a female founder and I'm in this sector, what grants are available to me? So there is quite a wealth of experience and knowledge guidance there online as well. So thank you very much, Cedric. Azadeh, I'm going to come to you because here we have a real life entrepreneur who has gone through the grant system. So how has it been from your experience? What were some of the challenges? And actually, even to begin with, why did you decide to go through the grant route first?
So the first things, because we are in a deep technology, we definitely needed to have lots of R&D to make sure that the technologies completely work. So we hired a couple of postdoc, and the salary is around $60, $60K. And we start with the Maytax, which has a very high successful rate, and they cover half of the cost. We covered the half of the cost, so that totally makes sense. And we hired postdoc for 3 years, 3 postdocs, so that's a really good support. And in comparison with the VC and angel money, we find okay, sector to sector, it's very different. But in a medical device, healthcare, you need to do a lots of validation, prototype, regulatory aspect, and lots of data that you need to do. And every single part, it's very time consuming and expensive. That's why to be well mature to go with the VC's requirement, it took a couple of years and couple of $1 million as well. Mm-hmm. So at least $2 million, I can say. And we find that instead of spending lots of time to convince VCs and angels, especially that we are in a very competitive area, which is a wearable technology, we find that it's much more makes sense and more secure to apply for the government grant and match it with the private money. That's what we find.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And maybe a quick follow-up question. Sometimes the reputation of grants is that they're really time consuming as well. I know you touched on the other side, but have you found that going through the grant process is quite time consuming? I know it's going to definitely depend on different sectors and different grants people are applying from, but from your own personal experience, how did you find that process?
Of course, it's not only filling the application is time consuming, but as Cedric said that getting the approval, it might take, especially during the COVID, it might take 6 months. And getting the first paycheck, it's from the first time that you start, it's a year now. So they have like a 6 months delay because they have a lots of application to review, and it's more competitive.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'll jump in here and add on there, Azadeh, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I find one of the key things we tell our startups is, especially the founders, you have to start understanding your finances, and not only from understanding your grants and everything, but understanding your capital management so that you can manage if your money's going to come in 6 months later, as you mentioned, or like Cedric says, know exactly what time period in the year some of these grants are open and when you're actually going to get that cash, because it really is going to be a make or break for entrepreneurs and founders. Perfect. Thank you, Azadeh. And I know you have some experiences with loans as well. Am I correct there?
That's correct.
Perfect. How have you found that experience?
So In my case, loan is much more easier and better in terms of financing versus VC and angels, because loan is getting interest but not take any equity or share. But VC's monies take more time to convince them to put the money, as well as they're going to take your shares. So if we could get, like as an example, if we needed $2 million and we could go with the $1 million government grant and 1 million loan, we definitely goes with loan versus VC money, because it's the same interest that they are going to get at the end of the point, but no share. So we definitely go for that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really the question on equity really depends on what stage you are, what sector, and it really, really is key there. And every stakeholder really has the role to play there. And so that's really wonderful to hear that loans are also an alternative options. I know sometimes people are worried and scared to get into the loan game because they might fear that they have to have other collateral. They might fear they're too early. They might not really understand how the banking system or the loan system works. And so they might kind of fear it. But I love what you're saying, that you can match your grants with the loans. That's also a really great tactic. And hopefully some of the founders listening today are able to leverage that too. Perfect. Cedric, Laviva, anything you want to add on the grants and loan space before we kind of move on from that?
Maybe just to say that, I like when startups also optimize the different sources of funding. So for example, you could be a VC-backed startup that also applies for grants, of course. So all of our companies apply for SHRED. We sometimes see companies that have an IRAP project as well, or applying for other grants. And, sometimes it's good to even optimize that with a little bit of loan. Just also making sure at the same time that you don't have so much outstanding where maybe at the next round, if a VC comes in, they're worried that you're going to have to raise equity capital to pay back a lot of the loan. So if you're, a very early stage startup and you have $6-7 million in loan, that may be a bit of a deterrent sometimes for a next round VC to come in, because they might be worried, as I said, that you're going to repay that loan using equity money. But if you're able to keep that loan under a certain level and optimize it with other sources of capital, it's I think that's an efficient way to manage your capital, as you said, Layial.
Yeah, that's perfect. And we'll kind of wrap up later on by kind of touching back again on that point, Laviva, because it's really important. And I don't want to overwhelm founders. I don't think you guys have to be experts in every single thing, but it is really key as founders to understand these different steps. So like Laviva said, when you're at the VC stage, you've done the right steps before. Or if you want to go through the loan stage, you understand what the implications are for your cash flow in the future as well. So make sure you spend a little bit of time. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier. So if I did, I apologize, but I did put on the chat the different types of financing available. So make sure you're starting to be familiar with some of these concepts. Of course, we're going to keep diving into it a bit more, but it's really key, especially linking what Laviva said there. Cedric, I'm going to jump to you. You've coached a lot of startups. And you know, like you said, from your EY days to your Montreal International days, when startups approach you and ask for advice, what's the most common challenge you hear from them?
Well, in terms of everything regarding the finances, definitely it's like you were saying at the beginning, that they're eager to raise VC money. They want to talk to VCs. They want to get their investor deck ready and pitch to VCs, and they're having trouble, right? Like most, and I guess Laviva will go more into that in detail, but most of the companies are being created, they're not VC backable just because of the VC model, right? Where they need you to do those crazy returns and get that big valuation in order for them to get into their money. So definitely what I talk to them and what I wish they were able to do maybe before, or what they would be able to know is like there's some successful companies that also get built without necessarily raising VC money, at least at the beginning. Right, like if we're talking in Montreal, Gsoft is a great example. Essence, they just raised a round, but before that, they built that business on their own. Luxury Retreats, if I remember, before selling to Airbnb, they also raised late. So in terms of, and I understand it, right? Like you read all these news, you see on Twitter, everyone's raising around. It's cool to have a VC backing you, etc. But it comes with a lot of responsibilities. And right, the VC also, they're not it's not their own money, right? They're investing. They have people who depend on them. They have LPs that give them money to make the right choices. And I guess another thing that I usually tell them when pitching to VCs, maybe I can finish on that for that point, is VCs are, yes, they're there to give you money, but I think they're great to also provide you insights and feedback either on your deck or on the industry you're trying to go into. Most VCs, the VC that you're going to meet, they see hundreds and hundreds of decks. They study that specific industry or sector. So you have that 30-minute, 45 minutes with them. Let's say, take advantage of that. Ask them questions, not just, hey, can you give me money, right? But try to pick their brains, try to understand their view, how they see the industry in the next 2, 5, 10 years. Because that's, for me, that's as valuable, if not more valuable than the money that you're asking, especially at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really key, Cedric. And I know sometimes people are intimidated to reach out to VCs or different stakeholders. And it's not to say don't reach out to them, but there's also other ways to hear the perspectives that they're saying, right, Cedric? Like you mentioned, there's lots of panels like these, especially now virtual and easy and accessible. There's lots of content available. I know a lot of the VC firms also release reports. Laviva, you worked on a brilliant report on the insurtech sector and released it publicly a few months ago now, right? I think, Cedric, we were talking about time being irrelevant, but I think it was a few months ago.
It was already a year ago, believe it or not.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right, perfect. So there's definitely ways to capitalize on that knowledge that Cedric is highlighting, which is very key. So make sure you guys are spending a bit of time looking and seeing what they're doing. Cedric, you mentioned something, and Laviva, I'm going to direct this question to you here because I think you're spot on. I think a lot of people are really excited by entrepreneurship. A lot of people are hearing, especially more so from the States, all these companies raising millions and millions of dollars, and they're getting acquired or they've raised billion, however have you, and they fall into I need to raise millions right now stage. And so, Laviva, we've talked quite a bit about VC, so I'm really interested to hear from your perspective. What should a startup know before they even start considering coming to a VC?
Sorry, do you mind if I just come back to that? I have something in my eye. I will be back in a minute. Sorry about that.
Of course. No, that's the joy of virtual questions there. In the meanwhile, as Laviva takes care of this eye situation, I do want to also share a link on the chat, which is a brilliant resource for you guys to look through what the different types of financing available is. And it's called it's by an organization out of Calgary. They are one of the funders and built Neo Financial. So if you're interested in that, please check them out. But they've built a whole resource pile for entrepreneurs. It's all free. You can access everything. They have lots of things from sales, etc. But for today's purpose, I'm going to highlight specifically their financing documents and their financing resources. So make sure you go and check that out. Azadeh has also shared with us another link there as well. So make sure you guys are accessing all of that information. Yes, and I see Peter sent BDC is also a great organization, and Dominic also sent a link. So make sure you guys are active on the chat because we're watching you guys and would love to engage with you. Laviva, I see you're back.
Yes, I apologize. I think it's just staring at the screen all day. It just dried my eyes out, and when it starts burning, there's no way out. Like I have to take care of it.
I hear you. Health first before any of this stuff. Do you want to give it a whirl now, Laviva?
Yeah. So your question was, there's so much kind of news about raising money in the US, and then I missed the second half of it. I apologize.
No worries at all. So we are hearing a lot of that noise about startups raising money, etc. And to be fair, and credit to Canadians, also Canadian companies are doing the same thing. But I'm curious to know from your side is, what should a startup know before they even start considering the VC route? Yeah.
So I think the first and foremost is what Azadeh was saying is that you're going to give up ownership, right, in your company. It is just as with lenders, they lend you capital, but you're paying interest, right, and then paying the money back at some point. In the case of equity funding, you're actually giving up part of the ownership in the company. And in the hopes that, when we invest in companies, the hope is that at some point, this company will continue to grow in value, and together we will exit that company in, let's say, 7-8 years through an acquisition, IPO, maybe a secondary, and so on. And so understanding first and foremost that you are going to be giving up some equity. It is going to be a long-term relationship. I think Cedric had some really good points there. before, he was saying that it's not just about the money. And I think that is more and more true today than ever before, because there's so much more money in the ecosystem, so many different VCs. Often, in the best opportunities, you as a VC are competing against a bunch of other VCs to get into a deal, right? So bringing a lot more value than just funding is super important, whether that's, a network in the specific industry. So in our case, network in the banking industry or just insurance, the overall financial services sector. It could be potential introductions to customers, potential introductions to follow-on funding providers, so Series A, B, C stage investors, and just business building experience, having built startups in the financial services sector or operated them. And then I would say that I keep saying this every now and then, but like entering a VC relationship is a very long-term relationship. So you want to make sure that you have the right partner. And as a VC also, we want to make sure that we're backing a founder that we think we can work with, because once you are in the relationship, it's really hard to get out of it. Sometimes people say that, it's harder to get out of it than a marriage. And I think in many cases, that's very, very true. So just know what you're getting into. Yeah, I think that would be the main thing I would say.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I love that adage, Laviva. Sometimes it's harder than in some cases getting out of a marriage. And it's incredibly true, because you're intertwining your whole business with another business. And so it's really key for people to understand. Azadeh, coming to you again, a live entrepreneur happening here today. What do you wish you knew before you started, especially having raised money in the way that you did?
About a patent, actually. We kept our secret sauce for lots of years as a secret sauce. And actually, at the end, we find that there is no way we could raise money unless that we have good patents, and then building a patent. So we had lots of opportunity before this stage to have several, but we keep saying that, okay, it's AI and we don't want to publish it publicly, our secret sauce, and we don't want other people to make it copy. And we keep it as a secret for a very long time. Now it's much more challenging to make it happen.
Okay, that's really interesting, and I know we have 10 minutes left, so that's how fast time goes when you're having fun. But Azadeh, I think you're hitting on something really important. I want to highlight. We won't have time to get into it, but I do want to highlight about the patenting, is that it can make or break you as well, just as your financing decisions can make or break you. So thank you for bringing that up, because I don't think it's often talked about. Now, of course, not every company in every sector has a patented product, so that's really also key for you guys to keep that in mind. But please do, especially if you're in biotech, or if you're in a heavy deep tech sector, make sure you do check out the IP structure there as well. Cedric, from your perspective, what do you wish startups knew before they even came and talked to you or asked you for your advice?
That's a good question. I covered it a bit earlier, but another point that I definitely think is really some of the startups that I'm meeting, it's happening less and less, but a lot of them are trying to go at it at first, at least solo. They're trying to really in their basement with their co-founders, instead of going out and reaching out for help, whether it's from incubators, accelerators eventually. Even for international startups, that's one of the big advices that I give, is that these incubators, what they provide you is, yes, maybe you're an expert in your industry, or one of the co-founders has done something similar or has a business major, but running a startup there's a lot of challenges related to that. Some of them that you don't know, right? And you don't know what you don't know. So joining an incubator at first gives you at least that base where you got all your grounds covered, and it also allows you to build the network if you don't already have one in the startup ecosystem. And if you want to attract some VCs, I think, and maybe Laviva can add, is I don't think they only invest in startups who went through an incubator or an accelerator, but it helps, right? you kind of know these people, you know who they've worked with, VCs know who they can call to get some feedback on that startup, on these entrepreneurs, how's their personality, right? She mentioned that it's like getting into a marriage, so you need to know how they think, how they react under pressure, etc. And for the entrepreneur, really, sometimes, you feel that they figure out 80% of their startup, and that 20% remaining, well, if they had joined an incubator, it would have been resolved, but they didn't, and they just thought that they didn't need that section or that part, and it becomes a handicap later on in their development.
Yeah, absolutely, Cedric. And I will kind of not to toot like our own organization, but one thing I do love about the Montreal ecosystem, and we do see this across Canada, but specifically in the lens of Montreal, is there's no need for you as a founder to go through the process by yourself. I find, we're obviously fintech focused, but we have Centech, we have District 3, we have so many I can't even actually name right now. We have Zoo if you're in the arts industry, we have the HSA one. So there is a lot of incubators and accelerators that can help you and guide you through all of these financing things, other things, of course, as well, but through your financing as well. So make sure you guys spend time to understand what's the best incubator for you and how they can guide you, especially if you're in the financing stage. Livia, I'm going to come to you because you mentioned that. So I would highly recommend you find an incubator as well that can help you and coach you and guide you as you're raising your funds. So we have about 5 minutes or so less. We're going to keep going through the questions, but I really encourage the audience to ask us a few questions. You guys have 3 brilliant panelists here. So any questions you have about financing, don't be shy. If we can't answer the question, we'll just have a technical difficulty. So we'll find a way to navigate that. No worries. So feel free, take advantage of the fact that you have these 3 experts here with us today. Azadeh, I'm gonna from your side, maybe one last question. How has your experience been as a female founder, not just in the financing, but just in building your company? How have you found that experience?
Compared with the 10 years ago, of course, it's lots of improvement, but still I can see that if you're a female and doing a deep technology, and my co-founder, she has a hijab as well. We are a visible minority and in the same country. So sometimes other people find that we don't have that much diversity in a co-founder team. But on the other hand, we are both new moms as well. So on the other hand, I did hear about it a couple of times that, you know what, you are a new mom, you cannot handle this this company in 2019. So I had my first year child, and Zara was pregnant. So they definitely they say that in front of us. Mm-hmm. But it's hard to convince people. It's harder, but it's possible still.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you saying that. And congratulations on the babies, on the baby for both of you guys. I appreciate you saying that because while, financing and understanding how to raise funds is key no matter what your gender is, it's also important sometimes to realize that as women and women from MENA, there might be some barriers that we go through specifically as well. So just to be cognizant of that as they go through. Laviva, I'm going to come to you maybe for one last question before the time wraps up here. And I'm actually curious more from this side. We've talked a lot about the VC, and I think this is going to be relevant for the grants and other things as well in some cases. But we often hear that traction and validation is key to VC financing, excuse me. How can startups building the foundation for this from the early days of their startup? What should they keep in mind as well?
Yeah, it's sometimes, often the truth is that it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. And it's like Azadeh is laughing because literally, I personally recognize this, and I hear founders saying this all the time. I think it depends on the business. So for example, if it's a B2B business, so you're selling to other companies, often what we would consider at least some form of validation or interest from the market is, you have an active pipeline of discussions that you're having. I like to see, when I'm doing due diligence, I ask for a pipeline where I'd like to see, what are the, potential contract sizes? When do you think you're going to close? Maybe some are qualified leads versus others that are, in negotiation. So just being able to show that, taking it from your head and being able to transfer it onto a sheet and being able to show that to investors, I think goes a long way. Obviously, having some sort of pilots, at least in discussions or having them in place is always helpful. And this is, I'm saying, in the early stages, right? And then on the direct-to-consumer side, often we see startups at least trying to build some sort of a wait list in place, so you can show that, yes, we have, 1,000 people that have signed up, giving me this, and this information, and saying that they're interested when the product launches. Maybe doing some testing of customer acquisition costs, showing that, yes, your value prop is interesting enough where you were able to at least test out, your CPA at a low cost. I think those are some early indications of market interest, because at the end of the day, when we are evaluating opportunities, we need to make sure there's a market for it, right? And the second thing is that we need to make sure the market is big enough where the venture-backed startup can become a massive business and return a good outcome for us. I know we wanted to touch venture math. Maybe we don't have time for that, but it's just alluding to that point as well, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Laviva, if you quickly want to touch on venture math, please feel free. I think it's very key for the startups to kind of get an understanding of that.
Yeah, I'd love to mention that, because I think it's something that founders should know, and I think it's often not talked about enough, which is that, to be honest, like when we look at our numbers and when we talk to other VCs, what we see is that for every investment we've made, we've probably talked to 99 other startups. So for every 100 startups we look at, we make one bet. That's not the case necessarily for all VCs. We're early stage. So, at a later stage VC where you're funding Series B startups, your pipeline is smaller. So maybe the numbers are different. But all this to say is that when we make a bet, we really need to make sure that all the right ingredients are in place for this to become a potentially big opportunity, because most startups will either fail or they're gonna just, kind of not really become massive. So when you play out the numbers, and if we're a VC that will only have, let's say, 20 to 25 portfolio companies with any given fund, then a large number will probably never return our initial investment, or they'll only return 1 to 2 times, like not a very good return. And so we only probably will generate a very big return from a handful of our startups, 2 to 3 maybe max, that will return that couple of $100 million exit or $1 billion exit. So every bet we make, we need to make sure that we believe this could become a very big business. And so that's why I think when Cedric was saying not every startup is a VC backable startup, it's very, very true.
Yeah, that's perfect, Laviva. So it's about time for us to wrap up the panel now. Panelists, I'm going to ask you one last question. I'm going to ask you the question, give you a bit of time to think about it as I answer some of these questions quickly on the chat, and then we're going to wrap up. But what's one last piece of advice you want to give these startup founders as they proceed in their financing? And before we get to that, I'm going to quickly take the last minute comments that I got from the questions. So one of the questions was, can you tell us about so as this was addressed to you, but I'm going to answer it on your behalf if you don't mind, but can you tell us about some of the government grants that you applied, and also any tips to making sure it's successful? So we've mentioned quite a few of the resources on the chat. I'm also going to link for everybody a government website that we mentioned earlier that you can map out what kind of grants you should apply for. So make sure you check that out on the chat. And as there's also in the meanwhile, also writing some of the chats that we have, some of the other options that you guys have. And then as Cedric mentioned earlier, the concierge service is one of the best services that will help guide you to make sure that you do also make sure your grants are successful as you go through it. There's also a question, I'm sorry, these are anonymous, so I'm not sure who I'm addressing them to, but we're going to power through it. I'm a founder who's just getting started. Are there any programs, incubators, accelerators that you recommend that I get started with? So if you're in Montreal, the best that I can tell you is Bonjour Startup has a brilliant ecosystem map for you to be able to determine what are the right incubators and what you should look for and who's available. I'm also going to put that link for you guys in the chat. So this is a robust ecosystem map for all of the incubators based here in Montreal. If you're not from Montreal or Quebec, then don't hesitate to reach out either to the organizers of the event today or reach out to us on LinkedIn. I'm happy to guide you as you guys are looking through other incubators across Canada. I think that's all we have time for. So panelists, are you guys ready for your last words of wisdom before we wrap up?
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. Azadeh, I'm going to start with you.
So should I answer the question of the grant or the last one?
Let's start. So we have a bit of time, so we can go through some of the. Let's do the advice, and then, or sorry, excuse me. Let's do the grants, and then we can go through the advice.
So long story short, the best company that we help, we find that they can help us to find the grants and apply for the grants. Like we write it as a draft and they modify it for us. Is the sponsor of this panel, which is R&D partner. So whenever we want to search it, instead of keep searching, we call them. It's a free for the first time. They call them and they find all. They talk about you to understand your business, and then they tell you all the opportunities and the ups and downs. But you can definitely, if you are doing a deep technology in R&D, I highly recommend to start doing a R&D. With the MyTax, but don't hire PhD or master student. Hire directly postdoc, because you don't want to take their time to take courses and write a thesis and so on. And the other things that for MyTax, you can apply for entrepreneurship program, for accelerator for your own self if you are a student as well, for 1 year. And in terms of the advice, if you are thinking about, if you don't have any background in business and entrepreneurship, definitely start with the startups. And if you want to expand your networks and build your networks, because it's impossible without networks, still go to the different accelerator and incubator. And to be successful, you have to come out of your comfort zone every single day. The end.
Oh, Azadeh, that was wonderfully said. Make sure you're out of your comfort zone every single day. It's a great life lesson and financing and entrepreneur lesson. So thank you for that. Laviva, we do have a few quick questions for you. So I'm going to try and power through them as well. One is, should we start building a relationship with a VC before we are VC backable?
Absolutely. I just had a call with a founder today. He's still validating his business. He just reached out to me saying, hey, I'm building something in fintech. I love your advice. And I couldn't stress this enough. And make sure when you do reach out to VCs, though, make sure that you are clearly saying that you're not looking to raise money right now. You're looking more for advice. And, you know, these investors might have a lot to share because, again, as Cedric was saying earlier, we see so many startups in similar categories, and especially for a vertical focus fund like Luge, you know, we see so many startups in that same category. So we're able to kind of pattern match and provide feedback.
All right, we're going to come back to Laviva when that comes in. There we go, Laviva, you're back again.
Oh, was I? Okay. How much were you able to hear?
Just the last sentence was the one we missed. Oh, okay. Cedric, I see you unmuted. Do you want to jump in and add something there as well?
Yeah, well, I just Laviva's back. Or...
I don't know what's happening. I apologize. Build the relationships. That's all.
Perfect. Thank you, Laviva. Cedric, I'll come to you.
Yeah, well, that's just exactly what I tell entrepreneurs: is don't wait till, you know, don't wait till you need the grant to apply for it. Don't wait till you need funding from VC to talk to them, to approach them, to, you know, they might have feedback that's gonna make you change your business completely, right? And make you see things the way you weren't seeing them before. So you were mentioning a bit, one advice that I would give to entrepreneurs, and me, honestly, it's ask questions. Don't hesitate to ask questions, contact people. Honestly, the startup ecosystem, that's maybe one of the reasons that I love it, is that you can almost send a LinkedIn to anyone and they will reply, you know, if you have a pertinent question, and they'll be glad to take 15 minutes of their time, grab a coffee if they're in town, if they have some time to talk to you and to guide you. So don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions.
Yeah, that's perfect, Cedric. And I'm sure all three of us get often reached out to on LinkedIn to be connected with. And I'll just echo that. I oftentimes say yes, with the caveat that as long as you guys are clear what the purpose of the call is and you guys are precise in why you're reaching out to the specific individual, then I think mostly everybody in the ecosystem understands that it really takes a village to raise a startup. So and children. But it's also really important to make sure that you leverage all of this. I'm not sure what other ecosystems globally look like, if that's the case, but I will speak about Canada. We're a very, very supportive ecosystem, especially in Montreal. Cedric, like you said, the connections and everything is there. You never have to build a startup by yourself. So if you're doing it alone, then just kind of pause and ask yourself, is this absolutely necessary to do by myself? Perfect. I also want to say that if you guys are hiring, and if there's anything is from our panelists or for anyone on the chat as well, or from our audience as well, if you guys are hiring, also make sure you share it with us, because I think it's also key to help supporting in this overall process. So make sure you guys keep that in mind. Laviva, we didn't hear your last minute advice.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, sorry. I thought I answered that. But yeah, so basically my advice to all founders is that don't hesitate to take the driver's seat when it comes to your fundraising process. So make sure that you're prepared with your deck and all the other data room material that you need to prepare. There are tons of resources online that you can use. Make sure also to research on the investors that you're reaching out to. Every once in a while, I get an email or a LinkedIn from a founder that's building something and completely not related to my industry. And it's just a waste of time for the founder and for the investor that they're reaching out to. So make sure to do the research. That goes a long way. And don't be afraid to follow up. And the last thing is make sure you have some sort of an investor update, whether that's on a quarterly basis, maybe it's on a bi-monthly, whatever basis, but just making sure that you're staying on top of mind for the investor, I think goes a long way. There are so many times when I reconnected with a founder because I noticed, oh, their traction is really taking off. It's a good time to reconnect. So that goes a long way.
Perfect. All right. Well, we have one last question that just made it through on time. So I'm gonna ask this question here, and it is: what are the most common share structures that are most suitable for startups? Do investors ask for voting shares? So Laviva, maybe I'll ask you to take that, but Cedric and Azadeh, if you guys have anything you want to jump in to add, you can do so right after.
Yeah, perfect. So basically, typically what we see is founders will start off with common shares. And it's a really good question because every once in a while when we're looking at a startup, one of the big problems that sometimes we run into is that the founders have already given up too much equity and at a very early stage. Maybe it's to a funding partner, maybe it was an angel investor that invested very early on. But let's say this angel investor owns 50% of the cap table or capitalization table. That's often a difficult situation for investors to come in at because we want to back founders that are active in the business, that are working hard every day to build that business. And as the company raises more and more capital, the founders will get more and more diluted. So if you're already at the early stages, starting with a low ownership of your cap table, that's just bad for everyone. So that's the first thing. VCs do get voting shares. Typically when VCs are coming in, these are preferred shares where it comes with certain rights, economically and from a control perspective as well. A really good resource to take a look at if you're in the midst of a VC funding is Venture Deals by Brad Feld. It's a really good 101 on I read the book probably like 3-4 times, even just for myself. So it's a good resource.
And I was just, while you were saying that, Laviva, I was just sharing the book in the comments.
There you go.
You see how wonderful this synergy is? Perfect. Any last comments, Cedric or Azadeh, on there? No? Perfect. So I'm going to thank Cedric, Laviva, and Azadeh so much for not only spending your evening with us, but for sharing your insight and for being so open and transparent and honest with what the experience looks like. So I really appreciate it on behalf of the audience. I want to thank you guys very much for being with us here today. For our audience, I hope you guys found this very informative. There is a ton of resources that have been shared on the chat. So make sure you go and check out the chat, save the chat however you like. Feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions. The organizers of the event know how to get in touch with us, so we'll be able to answer any of your questions there. Understand that financing, while might be a very difficult journey, is also a very, very rewarding one. So don't go it alone. Make sure you get support where needed, and understand that with the process, whichever one that you choose, you are most likely going to be successful throughout all of it. So on behalf of the panel, I want to thank all of our audience for being with us here today. And Parnaz, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you everyone for attending our event today, and thank you very much for the panelists. I know I was personally there really trying to take all the notes, but if you didn't catch everything, we will share the recording after this meeting. Again, thank you for all the panelists. We were very lucky to have everyone this amazing panel. I know it's very valuable for all the founders, especially women founders. I would like to also say that if you didn't catch this, we will have our fourth annual conference on November 4th and November 5th. We will add the link here so you can register. It's a very great way to also network with other women of MENA and other tech enthusiasts in general. So please feel free to register with the link below. And again, we will share the recording with you after. So now we have 30 minutes networking starting. So if you can click on the sessions, then it will redirect you to our panelists. They each have their own booth. So now that we are virtual, this is our way of having our booth or kiosk to ask your questions. So you can join and share audio or video if you want to talk to the panelists, or you can simply listen in if you want to just take a bit of more backseat. But I really encourage everyone to share their audio and video so we can network with you and we can hear your concerns and your suggestions for next events, or at the same time, just talk to the panelists. Thank you again, everyone, for attending.